Hello, good evening. Welcome. My name is Miguel Amado. I'm the director of Sirius Art Centre in Cove, County Cork, Ireland. And it's a great honor and pleasure to have you here for the launch of On Location, a video compilation of 6 compositions by Karen Power that are part of the Human Nature series. And we are also very thrilled to have here with us the majority of the musicians, performers who worked with Karen in making this artwork possible. It's really an amazing opportunity to share this work with all of you and those who will be watching this video later when we upload it on YouTube. Sound arts and experimental practices related to sound are very important in Cork city and county, and Karen and others are at the forefront of this activity. Since I became director of Sirius Art Centre a couple of years ago, right before the first COVID-19 related lockdown in Ireland took place, that I had been interested in working with musicians and practitioners here in Cork. And for different reasons, it became one of the key elements of that ambition 2 years after we all entered the pandemic. Karen and I have been in touch since around that time. Karen emailed me to introduce a Human Nature project, which was developing and then became an album which was released in September of 2020. And she'll be able to explain a bit what was her intentions and the process that was behind that project. But Human Nature then led to what we are experiencing today. I'm really, really thankful to all the musicians and performers who work with Karen. Also to the Arts Council of Ireland, who through an Agility Award enabled Karen and Sirius Art Centre to put together this project. And of course, my deepest gratitude goes to Karen for her fantastic work and for her companionship. In different occasions, we've been in touch in the last couple of years. And it has been really a pleasure to embark in this conversation. I am here today joined by my colleague Georgia Perkins. She's a curatorial fellow at Sirius, and also Danny McCarthy, who has been involved with Sirius for decades and has also been a board member until recently. So thank you so much for being here. So we are going to now present the On Location, the work. It lasts for around 30 minutes. And as I said, it's a video compilation of 6 compositions, one of which is new, and we also have the opportunity to also discuss that. I will share my screen, play it, and then we will evolve into a conversation. Meanwhile, Karen, if you want to say anything at this stage, or...
No, I think I would recommend headphones while you're listening, particularly for Jane's track and one of John's tracks, just because of the frequency range and your computers. Yeah, but other than that, enjoy it.
I will also ask everyone to mute themselves, and everyone will be identified, the musicians across the video. And then we'll also have the opportunity to know all of them or those who are here today. So thank you so much, and I'll play it now. watching again, after I watched the first clips and then and then we worked on the composition, it was really impressive and surprisingly still fascinating to understand the depth and of the work that goes on such a piece. So I'll just throw some questions and then we can open up. Georgia will also have questions. Let me double check the chats just in case there is anything else. No. And so I guess, Karen, I would start by asking you, the title of the series, Human Nature, somehow represents something that you mentioned to me since early on and that you have explained, which was this idea of a duet between your field recording, so nature, although nature may not just mean the natural world, may also mean the built environment. So this duet between your field recording and musician / performer. And so I'm curious about where this idea came from, whether you looked at your field recordings and you can tell us more about when you started making field recordings and how this has become vital in your practice. So it came from looking at that material and then thinking how this could be looked at by someone else, or was more a direct intention of inviting colleagues to actually engage with those field recordings. So I'm curious about that idea of the duet.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all, wonderful performers. You did nature proud. They were really, it was great to watch them again. It was, yeah, just fantastic. So I guess, I mean, that idea of pairing human and nature, for me, is where the field recordings and the desire to bring field recording into sort of more musical settings came from. So that it's always been a kind of an interest in like what happens when you bring a musician with all of their skills, training, musical context, knowledge, and you bring a natural environment, as you say, whether it be an industrial environment or a natural one, with all its natural harmony, rhythms, timing, uniqueness. And then, so what happens if you bring these into the same space? They don't naturally belong together. But what I hope happens is that the field recording invites the musician to consider their instrument in a way that they perhaps have not considered their instrument. And that through the musician, we hear things in the field recording that maybe we choose not to hear when we hear that in the natural environment. So there's the potential to kind of open up something through dialogue that maybe offers something to a listener that that they can connect to, or that so I think it is that sort of that conversational space. I think that and all I'm doing is kind of prodding or trying to start the conversation. Does that answer that?
Georgia? Yeah.
Yeah, I just kind of continuation of Miguel's question. I wondered about how you respond to the ethnomusicologist John Blacking's idea that music is comprised of humanly organized sound. And I wondered about maybe how the interpretation of what music is kind of redefined in terms of bringing both this idea of humanly organized sound and sounds coming from outside of the musically constructed world? Is it kind of moving beyond that binary?
I'm not sure it's moving beyond it, but it certainly, I mean, you know, from the moment I started composing, I think I've always been interested in that notion of why we categorize musics and sound the way we do, and why we choose to, I mean, look, for us all to exist in this world, we filter, right? We filter everything in our lives. And I guess as a you know, as a composer or somebody interested in sound, I've become very aware of that filtering process. So I think, you know, I think how we categorize music in the broadest sense, and you know, there's a lot of people talking about this right now, you know, but I think it does come down to an acknowledgement that it's not the music that's different, it's the way we listen to it, and how we choose to be part of a musical experience, or outside of it. So whether music is a passive act, or whether we choose to be part of the engagement. So yeah, I mean, for me, definitely that core question of, you know, placing a musical context that is learned and developed by humans, no more than the instruments are made by humans, and sort of putting that in a situation that's not as influenced, shall we say, because we can't say it's not influenced or it's not been altered. Practically every natural environment has been altered by humans, but maybe the alterations aren't as big, or not as sonically present, shall we say.
John, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to raise a point about Blacking's description, which is very interesting in the context of this discussion, because what it shows is our historical blindness or deafness, if you like, to the fact that music has never been entirely humanly organized sound. And to take a very simple example, we heard Jane playing extremely beautifully, for example. She could have played that piece on a different flute and it would still have been beautiful, but it would not have been the same sound. All instrumentalists work with the characteristics of the instrument that they're using. If I play this guitar and I play that guitar, you know, I've got to adapt myself to what that instrument is telling me. Now, to a very large extent, all I think that we're talking about here is an expansion of that concept. And you know, the sound environments in which we played our pieces are just another part of the picture that you, or of the sound world that you negotiate with as you play. So it's you know, I think it's not a question of being different, it's just a question of being more. Or maybe it is a question of being different, I don't know, but it's just worth remembering that. And you know, I think a very intriguing aspect of this is it's only possible to say something like what Blacking is saying if you are deaf to or conceptually ignoring an aspect of the musical experience.
I like actually to just pick up on something that John just said, which seems to apply to what we watched and listened to, because it seems there is an addition into On Location, these 6 pieces we encountered today, with respect to what was the original Human Nature album or process, because here we are encountering the musician, performer, and their instrument, but also the environment in which they are performing, and then their response to the field recording. So I was wondering whether Karen or any of the musicians, performers here, could maybe elaborate a bit on how did you negotiate from what Karen's proposed early on, and she shared a field recording with the specific musician who then produced the piece that then became part of the album. And then in this specific selection, there was also the environment in which the recording then took place, the video recording took place. And I'm curious about that because it's very, at least for me, it's interesting to encounter the interpretation of this musician with their instrument within that setting. And all the settings also, they also speak to the field recording beyond a response. Say, for instance, Sirens of New York performed in Berlin, and then suddenly there is that ambulance walking past, which enhances the experience that we are having. Or with Jane, it's the same, you know, like just even if we don't hear the sounds of those trees or the environment, that visual presence is so strong that necessarily, kind of creates another layer of perception. Or with Laura, when, you know, she's vocalizing, and even the square, like that setting, it puts us immediately into a stage, and now we tend to encounter animals in the Western world within stage / other things that we know. So I'm curious about how did you negotiate those locations, and how you and the process that led you to them.
Did one of the performers want to respond? Or yeah, Jane?
I'd like to just say that this whole project it's just so moving and so deep. So I am in Colorado Springs, and what I want to just say about that, just before I say where I am and where I was, you've really, Karen, given us this gift of allowing us to be so present in such a holographic, deep, multidimensional way, right? So the entering of the dream and the entering of the past is somehow very, very present in all of these pieces that I saw and heard today. So Colorado, and I'm in Southern Colorado, is, you know, we occupy indigenous native nations here. So the Apache, the Comanche, the Shoshone, the Cheyenne, I'm probably missing a number of them, but the Ute is another native peoples here. And there are Ute trees, that is that these are trees that have been designated somehow special, and they've been manipulated by the Utes in some way to indicate a variety of different important locational places. For example, they might be a portal tree. They might change the shape of it. They might change the shape of it to indicate where water might be, so that other peoples can find where water sources might be. So there is a place here, Black Forest, where there are numerous Ute trees that have been shaped by the people. So I picked one of these trees because it just reminded me to think about sounds of the past, right? And what we're occupying, and the sounds that have been lost because of industrialization. What are we missing? What are we missing out on in terms of sounds? What did the trees used to hear, right? And the deer, as we were there were deer walking by and tons of birds. And so I wanted to invite at least all of you, anyone interested, in that place of land and texture and memory and ancestral acknowledgement, And I just want to thank you for that. And I saw that in a lot of the others, like this very beautiful juxtaposition between sounds and space and liveness, like the presence of that moment and the presence of now. And I don't know, you've just allowed us to really think about all of these things. And I wanted to thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Jane. And yeah, I mean, that's, I remember an early conversation about that place and you sort of describing it, and what I find it really interesting about these videos and these locations too is that they are very much linked to the individual performer. You know, that there's a like when I received the videos, or even in early conversations, you know, it's I guess maybe because, you know, we've been on and off, we've been working together in some capacity artistically for quite some time, and there was a kind of an unwritten language, I guess, that came from the private performance, you know, in your rooms. And then so when I extended this invitation for location, I just, not that I knew what each of you would do, it's not anything like that, but I somehow was not terribly surprised by the breadth of videos that were kind of coming back, and I think that's really interesting because it shows that kind of that connection, that's you know, because it was very open, as you know, it was sort of, okay, so here's the field recording of a particular moment in time, of a particular place that none of you have been to, and sort of through my ears. And then now let's talk about another place that somehow evokes something else in both the field recording and your performance, and how does that it really is something intangible, and I'm very proud of what we've kind of been unearthing here. I think it's there's something really really yeah, just really interesting about it. And I mean, Simone, yes, Simone, you're still here. Simone's video, I actually started roaring laughing when I watched it for the first time, because it was just fabulous. I mean, you know, just so beautifully framed, and just and so Simone, and yeah, just that each of them has a life, and is alive, and that was the aim. That was without drawing too many restrictions on people, to let something evolve, and I think that happened.
Karen, I wondered if you could talk more about your move away from the restrictions that maybe in Western music traditions, you know, the score has a lot of, it restricts the performer in lots of ways. And I guess I wondered if you could talk more about the shared listening process with this, not only between the composer, the performer, and also the audience too, and how it gives more agency to other kind of listeners in that experience.
Sure. I mean, you know, I suppose it's, my interest is not in any way to devalue any type of musical process. It's more to sort of probe that idea of musical, as a score, any score being devised for specific purposes. So a score is communication. It's a way of communicating ideas between everybody within a certain musical tradition and within a certain musical world. However, so I increasingly found that that world wasn't speaking to, it wasn't communicating what I needed it to communicate. And so I began to sort of think, okay, well, of course it doesn't. You know, the musical score was created and evolved with certain needs. And here am I working with sounds that do not adhere to those rules. So after quite a long time of sort of trying to fit the square into the circle, I slowly moved away and thought, okay, so in the beginning, it was kind of some things were still being notated. And then there would be a whole load of other notes to describe things, or and eventually I came up with the idea of the aural score and aural part. Now, as in, I was hugely influenced by a number of other musicians and artists who have been asking the same question for a very long time. And actually, it was David Toop, the improviser and writer, who really crystallized it for me in a piece from 2008, which he wrote for Quiet Music Ensemble, where he did use an aural, I don't think he called it an aural score, but that's what it was. And that particular piece began with a score that he then kind of got rid of when he met the musicians, because it got in the way. And I suppose it's that kind of, it's that thinking about, I'm interested in thinking about each musical process as something that is malleable and that is alive and can be interchanged based on the needs of the musical process or the musician or what's happening in a situation. So, you know, sometimes my scores can actually be partially abandoned as the process goes along. So the written into some of these pieces are the option for the musician to learn the aural part, which is basically a private part that they get into one ear. And if they feel that as they're moving through the piece and as they're living through the piece, that they no longer need this, that it's actually getting in the way, then no more than you would memorize a score, you can actually kind of decide to leave that behind and play with the memory of that. So I think that for me, it's score is something that is alive and can be moved, is interchangeable with different processes. And so the aural score is for electroacoustic heads, is basically the tape part, right? So it's the part that the audience hears. But I suppose by calling it an aural score, I like to make the distinction that it's actually a shared listening experience for the musicians, for the audience, and so the musician is kind of negotiating and interpreting live and listening. So it's kind of to encourage everybody to join in that process and feel connected with the process. I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
No, you have. And maybe you could go on to talk about, I think you've hinted to it, but it's the idea of guided improvisation, which I know is important for you.
Yeah, so I guess the only reason that I use the word guided is just, I suppose, it's to avoid the illusion that you know, that a musician is completely free to bring what, like, all of their wants into a piece. So it's guided from a listening experience, and it's also guided by Oftentimes my pieces will work with timelines that are very strict. Now these micro pieces, these are the shortest pieces I've ever written, by the way. And that in itself is kind of interesting because like field recordings, the reason a lot of my pieces are so long is because it takes a while for a listener to kind of enter into that space. And this is doing the exact opposite. So actually, I feel I've made the musician's job even harder in these pieces, which is why I really take my hat off to the interpretations that have come back, because they're very short and you're sort of straight in while being asked to sort of take it in and listen. So yeah, the amount of guidedness in my works will very much depend on who the musicians are and whether or not we have a relationship. So I do write fully notated music also. And so I like to think of it that the more I kind of get to know and have a relationship with the musician, the less heavy-handed I am in terms of the additional text notes or graphic notes. So it's really, again, it's about negotiating that space with the musicians and making sure that I'm only providing enough that's actually going to launch them forward, not restrict. Listen, this is an ongoing process. I'll be having this conversation until I die, I hope, because every single musician and their needs and every single sound is different. And, so it's that kind of, again, it's that negotiation that I really enjoy.
It was interesting when you said that these are the shorter pieces you've made, because the field recording, I guess, starts as an act of listening. And so I'd like to ask you more about that, like how do you identify the locations that you want to engage with, and then how is it that what becomes a field recording extract, that was what you proposed to the musicians here. What is the raw material? Does it mean it's 18 hours of microphone and capturing? Tell us more about that, because while speaking about the event today with other people, and a lot of people had difficulty in understanding what I was talking about in terms of what is a field recording, and even in the humanities you use that expression with other meanings sometimes. So I'm curious about that. And then how did you come up with these extracts? And then how did you come up with the final selection for what we saw on what is human nature and also here?
So a small question then, Miguel. Okay, let me just start with this project, because this is a very specific, the needs of this project were very specific. And they kind of go back to the early days of field recording for me, where when I began doing this, I was, in order to kind of, it's overwhelming, right? Field recordings, where do you start? Where do you finish? And so I began by focusing on kind of just one sound, and one instrument, and even restricting the technique of the instrument. So really trying to get into what connects this sound and this sound. And then, so I did a few experiments around that. And then I kind of went on and was doing a lot more, shall we say, complex field recording type projects. So when the pandemic happened, I started to think, actually, this is an opportunity to again focus on that sort of singularity of purpose, and really kind of listen to what a particular sound is offering or is doing to a musician, and what a musician is willing to kind of offer back. So in choosing the field recordings, you know, obviously I have a lot to choose from, but I tried to pick field recordings where I specifically remember at the point of making the field recording, noting with kind of my human musical hat on, characteristics that I felt connected to my musical world. And so I tried to pick specific sounds or places or combinations of events where I felt, you know, there's something, for some reason, the piece that's actually coming to mind is not one of the on location pieces, but it's belonging to the original CD, which is a recording made in Crete. And it was this small little village in the middle of the mountains in Crete. And we woke up to the sound of, you know, because you're in the middle of nowhere, really. It's quiet, or it should be quiet. And it was the exact opposite of quiet. So you had like these chickens doing this kind of electronic, I don't know, they were mimicking electronica. And then you had this loudspeaker blaring some kind of announcement. And then you had these motorbikes like zooming all over the place. And in that moment of listening, it was just like, this is an entire symphony. Like these things, they should not, first of all, they should not be here, and they should not, but somehow in the chaos, there is something that is just like being overwhelmed by a huge symphony orchestra. And you don't quite know why, but you're intrigued. And so it's things like that, moments like that, where I was sort of said, now what happens? I wonder, can somebody else hear maybe what I've heard? And is that enough to spark a musical response? And is that musical response transferable to an audience, or is it just something in my imagination? So it's kind of something around those words. I will just say that no, I don't record for 18 hours straight. Most of my time field recording is spent listening. It's really only at the last minute that I will press record. And I will proudly say that this was advice that was given to me by the wonderful and extraordinary Chris Watson, because basically he said, listen, whatever you record, you have to listen back to. So unless you plan on spending months in your studio listening to 24-hour recordings, then, you know, just steady on, you know, just in a situation where I can do that, I can listen for as long as I want, and then I can decide, then that's what I would do. In a lot of the more inhuman places, that's a luxury that I just do not get, because most of the time you're what I would call panic recording, because the situation is fragile, or not necessarily safe. And so, you know, you're working with an environment, and you're basically capturing what you can and being as prepared as you can, but something always unplanned happens. So it's almost like you're doing a little dance with a lot of unknowns.
So I also have at least two more questions, but everyone else feel free to join. So one question it has to do with Laura's piece. Was there any specifics with respect to her instrument, voice, and when you were in touch with her or when you thought about involving her, was there something like you felt, okay, it's not as a, or actually the other way around, were you thinking, okay, this field recording goes well, it needs to be involving someone playing electric guitar or flute or voice, you see, or not, or you see what I'm asking, like, is there anything specific within that use of voice, or no, or is an instrument as others?
Yeah, no, so all of the pieces, all 18 of these pieces are open instrumentation. And the musicians, even when I contacted the musicians, knowing that Laurie is a singer, I left their choice of instrument open. So she didn't have to respond using her voice. I'm more interested in the musicianship of the musician and how they choose to respond. So, for example, Simone is a pianist. And you could see that she wasn't playing the piano, and she didn't, that's the same instrument she used for the original CD as well. But in Laurie's case, I was very aware of her own practice and her interest in birds. And so there were definitely pairings of, you know, which piece was being sent to which musician, because I definitely thought of it as, you know, that each of these musicians are like sort of like ambassadors, you know, of what an interpretation could be. You know, they're like the cream of the crop, right? So, you know, this is, and so that I hope in time that others would pick up these pieces, you know, and hear these interpretations and kind of, you know, wonder what their offering might be. So I think in the back of my mind, I was always thinking about this, that, you know, like just having this huge array of musicians' voices, and as examples of how one might play with a field recording. Yeah. But I don't know if Laurie can actually speak to us, because I know she's on a train, but I'm not sure if you have anything to add there, Laurie. Yeah, I don't think she can. She's on a train journey.
But she can. Hello, she's
she's
chat.
texting us.
Yeah, I'm here.
Or Simone, actually. It might be interesting if Simone wanted to say something about why you chose the instrument that you did.
Yes, it's a traditional Swiss instrument. It's because I'm living in Switzerland, and the first field recording Karen sent to me was made in Bern, the capital of Switzerland. And it was a very urban setting, but there was a little sentence and I could hear an elderly woman, and she was saying, "I'm tired and I need to sit on a little bench." And this was the moment when I was thinking of putting this contrast with an instrument which is not really connecting with this urban environment. And during the COVID period, I was learning this instrument, and so it was for me the perfect moment to try to work with this these breathing sounds from the bellows.
Super. Thanks so much, Simone.
Thank you.
So Laura is saying she's writing something on chat. Simone, it was quite an interesting, even your comment now was really interesting, because it was also an invitation. It seems that it was also an invitation from Karen that enabled experimentation past what maybe was the expectation. And like you were saying, you were learning this this instrument, which, and I think that's also what is interesting in creative processes. You know, like there is maybe a set of expectations from the artist, in this case Karen, when she was in touch with you, and then you came back with something else. So So Laurie is saying I was strict with the score and the location was very familiar to me. Yeah, so that's quite interesting, because it's also, I was really strong, you know, it was, but in the score I was transported to a place unfamiliar. That's nice. Yeah, because for me, what I think that's also something I'd like to ask Karen now, and it brings us also to the new work that was created specifically for video recording, because I'm interested in you, Karen, maybe recalling the moment in which the opportunity of further developing the Human Nature series past the CD into this, what exists now. So what was the drive behind you in making this happen? Or if you were trying to experiment something else or test something else when there was the need to identify another location where the video recording would take place? And then how this may or not have led to the piece where John performs in the water, in which somehow it's so, and which basically it's the field recording is also the location where the performance takes place. And then maybe there is something to say about that that is of interest to all of us.
Sure. So, I mean, I suppose in terms of extending the project, this was always my hope. I think I was always kind of like, I'm very fond of the idea of living works. So, you know, the basic premise of the work is here, but that doesn't mean that this little part of it can't travel over here and be over here and offer a different take on the same work. So I think this was always, you know, 18 short pieces, you know, how would you program something like that, right? So, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be fabulous if you could, because they're field recording based, you know, I imagined performances where it might be in a gallery and you might have one live performance, one performance that's being streamed by video in a live location that's elsewhere, and then one kind of completely stationary performance somewhere else. So it was kind of, I think that idea of playing with a structure and kind of moving it somewhere else, because I felt that these pieces were open enough to allow another. I mean, there are so many pieces of mine that I could never do this with because they are very definitely a thing. But I think I was building these as something that would be malleable. Then when we started talking, Miguel, and we were kind of thinking, okay, well, let's think more, because we were still in kind of lockdown and weren't sure what was going to happen. And we thought, okay, let's take the video component, location. And then I thought, at the time I had been doing a lot of recording when I could down in Cuas Pier cave, because this place is extraordinary. Based on where the tide is, it sounds completely different. And it's basically the cave is in conversation with you. So I thought, okay, let's now take a piece where the location and the field recording. So the field recording in the aural score is the same place, but taken at a different time. So, you know, and then you have the live, and even it's a question of, like, I love that difference between, you know, it's one of the first things I would say to my students is you have to acknowledge when you field record that what you hear is not necessarily what you're recording, right? So the power of the mic and the power of each bit of technology. And so, you know, what John was able to hear while in the cave was not at all as exaggerated as what we hear in the aural score, yet the natural state offers something else right? Something different. It's just another angle on the same place. I was lucky enough to have access to a very fine and courageous and ambitious musician who was willing to do something crazy, like try to go on location with an electronic instrument and see how we could make something. So I mean, that was just he and I over 2 days on this location, and trying to try out different takes and see what worked, in between a canoeist who came through the cave at some point, right in the middle of one of our takes. So yeah, I mean, it's I like the fact that it was again a negotiation, even to make the video recording. Does that I've rambled, so sorry.
No, it's fantastic. And I'm actually, I have also another question, which is, and following from what you just said. So this particular piece is called Sea Stories. And since the beginning, when I came across the album, I was a bit intrigued with, well, first, not just the format, like 3 minutes kind of pop song style length, but it's fine. I mean, I guess it has to do with the nature of also the work, and you explain a bit that, because honestly, like, yes, when you just said, I listen, and then maybe the take of recording, or I press record, it's just a short length, it's just a short period. And somehow when people think about field recordings and music, for me at least, I had the opposite impression, like, yeah, you just press and you're just there. So, but yeah, so it was a bit intriguing there. But I think the most intriguing thing to me was the titles, the different titles, some of which are pretty much descriptive, like as almost like scientific captions, bats, but some are more poetic or have a more narrative component, like Sea Stories. And I'm curious about that, because that was something I was intrigued and I was not necessarily expecting. Maybe it's just my, preconception of what I was going to listen or watch, but I'm interested in whether or not you felt there was a need to introduce some narrative, or if it was just, it's more an intuitive choice of words that somehow encapsulates what the listener will experience.
Yeah, so piece titles, it's obviously my year to explain piece titles, because I've been getting these questions a lot. In this case, it was, for the album, it was a wish not to interfere, to just let the duets be duets, and not have a sort of a story that was other than the musician's interpretation. So I think I chose a title for Sea Stories purely because, as I said, for me, the cave is speaking to me, and it was just an immediate reaction to that. It was just kind of, okay, well, I need a title for it, and it just seemed, and I think the fact that it's a place I keep going back to. So, it's and every time I hear something new, so it's a kind of like a variation on a story, right? It's like a myth that keeps growing legs, or like a round robin story that never gets told quite the same way the second time. But I mean, usually my piece titles try not to get in the way of the music. Sometimes they're funny, or they're kind of they're doing something else, but I think the purpose is for them to kind of stand alone if they're making a statement or they're saying anything, and otherwise it's just to have them get out of the way, so that we can start to listen. But as soon as you put a title on anything, you're saying something, so there you go.
I have also a curiosity, which is, so do you feel that any of these compositions may have a live iteration, and if yes, what kind of change it may exist from what we can listen or watch now and my experience in a live environment?
Absolutely. So actually, I think in July, some of these pieces are going to be picked by an ensemble of individuals who are going to perform them in a park. And I'm really intrigued to hear what happens there. You know, I mean, the scores, as Laurie said, the score, there's a lot of information in the score, whether it be paper or in the aural part. And what is very interesting, I think, based on my experience of working with musicians, is that journey that the first time working with musician goes through and where they end up. So usually in the beginning, it's kind of, you know, oh, okay, so this is really open, and you know, I can kind of, you know, maybe do what I want, or and as they move through and really listen and follow the score and read what's supposed to be read, and you know, it's a new process, right? So this takes time to be integrated into the way a musician might work. But actually what tends to happen is they discover more and more kind of built-in restrictions. But what's really nice is these restrictions are partially from me, but partially from the field recording. And that's the point, is that they are in the field recording. So, you know, it's kind of, and I really like that it happens with ensembles, it happens with individuals, you know, that kind of transition. And I can always identify when they've clicked, when it's like, oh, okay, so, you know, it's my score. You know, it's telling me what to do. So it's not that the interpretation is in any way restricted. So somehow it still allows an openness of interpretation, but guides. As I said, you know, I will be reshaping these kinds of scores continually, because it's not a set thing. But I think in these pieces, like I say, I hope that this next ensemble is going to listen to the interpretations that have been made and base theirs. You know, they are allowed to do the exact opposite, but they are told to listen. So, you know, it must be in conversation with what's there. And if not, it's a bad performance, just like any other piece of music. And it's actually quite, you know, quite that simple.
I have a final question. Anyone else wants to say anything before I wrap it up, or?
I just had a question about the sequence of performances and the editing process to that. You know, how did you decide? Did you intentionally decide to end with the new piece?
Yes, I think we, Miguel, you and I think discussed this and thought it would be nice if because also the new piece is the longest. It's a whole 6 minutes. So I don't know, I just felt it was good at the end. The rest was a decision once, so Max Lecain did the editing. And once he came back with the first edit and I watched through, I just felt why am I keeping them in order? Because you know, these have been extracted from 18 pieces. So I guess my natural state was to put them in order, especially because Sirens of New York is piece number 1 on the CD. But then when I listened to them, I just really felt, actually, no, this is, and then when I saw Jane's video footage, I just really, I don't know, I just felt that it kind of embodied a state of mind that was welcoming into the rest of the project. So it went first.
Yeah, I have to say the same. It was a bit intriguing that the concept of pairing human and nature, nature being not just the natural world, was quite interesting at the beginning, because everyone I would speak about the project also, they had the impression that when we were referring to nature, we were referring to the environment, to the natural world. And starting with Sirens of New York, which is such emblematic urban soundscape, which some of us might have experienced in real life, but if not through pop culture, it's really part of our kind of intellectual landscape. So it would have been quite not shocking, but like an interesting clash to start with. Well, this is not about nature in that traditional sense of the word, but on the other hand, Jane's that setting that was absolutely, like she described it today, and it was so incredible to engage with it and then really be transported into a whole different world. And I have the feeling that when you choose specific locations to go and listen and record, that's also some of the intention is also that to go, because you could record just near where you live, right? And you've done that in Ireland, but going to different locations in the world, some of which we have also in our mind, how complex they are and fascinating on one hand, but also creating some sort of fear or other sensations. It's quite interesting. So yes, there was an interesting, although it's just 6 pieces, but there was, of course, was an interesting dialogue and process of editing the order. So my last question to you would be, that's incredible what Jane just wrote here. She wrote, the person who was handling the camera of the video recording lives in the forest, so he had a very visceral personal history with the trees and the landscape. I think that comes through the video, definitely. I mean, I think what you described, what it makes today in terms of the mystical presence that forest and those particular trees have for the communities that are there. It comes through. It really there is some sensation that we can encounter. So my last question, Karen, would be, so I'm not sure whether you thought when you were making the album from the selection of 18 musicians that responded to your invitation or that you engaged with. I'm not sure whether you thought there would be another work like John's work. So my question is, do you feel there would be other opportunities for you to do other pieces like this in the future? And if yes, how? And if not, how are you closing also the chapter?
Wow. There's a question I had not thought about. I guess, I mean, I think if there is an iteration where there is another contextualization of the series, then there's potentially, another living piece within it. But I think I feel for me that the sort of human nature series is a very particular thing. And like I will write duets for humans and nature, but I sort of feel this needs to be bookended, because it was originally created in a unique context that hopefully we will not be in again. Now, if we have another 2 years of lockdown, what else are we going to be doing, right? But I sort of feel I've answered questions that were probing when I was thinking about creating this series. So, and usually with me, once I feel like I've sounded a version of an answer of a question, I take 2 or 3 runs at it and then I move on. So I probably this is closure for that particular project.
Miguel, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your answer and for your overall contribution to today's conversation, and to everyone else who also joined us and those who attended. And thank you so much, Karen, and all the musicians, performers here for the wonderful work that you've enabled us to experience. It was absolutely a fascinating journey to actually to be part of. I want to thank everyone also at Sirius that's contributed one way or the other, including Georgia here today. And yeah, so we will be making everything available online so that others can engage with the work. And again, Karen, John, Jane, Simone, Lore, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to be here and an honor to be here with you today.
It was fascinating. And I'm from another world entirely, but.
Elaine is a wonderful painter.
Well, what occurs to me is how much similarity there is in the world, and that visual artists have been doing something like this for hundreds of years. And I don't know why it took the oral world so long to catch up. I mean, you look at something out there and then you do something with it, interpret it, respond to it, work against it, play with it. And if you're a teacher, you set out all these things from the visual world, and then you tell students to choose their medium and choose their instrument. Is it going to be ink or oil paint? And they just go with it. And so I'm glad to have this simpatico.
Wonderful.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening or day according to your time zone. And I hope we will be able to see each other again in the near future, whether online or on sites. And Karen, thank you so much again, and see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Fabulous.
Bye.